Good morning also from my side. Bernd Vogel, my name. Michael Cole, my co-authors as well in the audience in the first row, and Heike Bruch couldn't make it today. Thanks for this honor to be here and be awarded with that. When Michael sent over the email, I said, that's shocking. You know, so that was my immediate response to say, oh my God. So what do we do now? So, no, really kind of enormous. And I think going to what you said earlier, Tom, the time frame of things, of these studies, that's shocking as well. If you think, I think we started around 2003 or 2004 and had it published 9 years later, and which is great and annoying at the same time. But we got there. And what I would like to do is today showing you a bit the frame in which that study sits. It's a measurement development, but it's part of a broader area that we work on, and show a bit of that, show you the study, skip all the data slides, and then go a bit kind of what's further perspectives that we pursue as kind of ongoing and also future ideas. And then show a bit how we created as well impact with this idea, and how also organizations found us actually who were interested in that. And that might be shocking as well, that they actually come to you and say they want to work with you on that and learn more. So why energy research, the overall purpose? These are four people, one of whom you might know, which is Manfred Ketz-de-Vries on the right side. Then we've got Jürgen Weber, who has been CEO of Lufthansa. This is Dominic Taylor to the left. He's kind of group CEO of PayPoint, the payment system based in the UK. And of those who have been to the UK might have actually been into those shops. This is the CEO of Sainsbury's. What do they have in common? They talk about energy in some form or another. Manfred Ketz-de-Vries talks about, organizations have these free-floating, potentially aggressive, affectionate energy, and effective leaders know how to channel the energy in the right direction. That's one thing. Justin King, in one of the interviews he gave, said his leadership style is about to exert energy. And Dominic Taylor of PayPoint said leadership is about inspiring, directing energy. Therefore, it's essential to capture hearts and minds. Now, to kind of leaving Manfred Ketz-de-Vries aside for a moment, and going back to Jürgen Weber, so he says, kind of, how do we motivate organizations in total in good time? If I look at the two above, and that's kind of later quotes. The interesting thing is, I'm not so sure that whether they kind of in-depth know what they talk about in terms of, capturing hearts and minds and exerting energy. But what they do have, I think, a really good gut feeling of understanding how it works. If you would interview them like you did, you would clearly kind of unpeel the ideas that they have, and they understand that this is a kind of, in your language, a great resource. So we find that again and again in a way, that this seems to be kind of an important issue, a task for leadership, and influence in organizations. So, and this has kind of been with us for years and years. So and based on this and earlier accounts, the overall kind of starting point of these research endeavors are these three questions that we had, and I look back into our early slides when we tried to convince organizations actually let us in and do research with them. So what is that energy that now these four people kind of refer to? How can energy be made tangible and measured? So how do we get a grip on this as the first question? Then understanding the creation and impact of energy. So how does it develop in organizations, on teams or departments, and what kind of impact does it have as a second guiding question? And then we spoke about that time of kind of big ambitions, strategies for managers, how to influence that based on the research insight that we found. So how can you activate, use, and maintain energy? So it's not only about mobilizing, but also about maintaining. That was the frame that we had, and we then called it, we started that in the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland, and we called it the Organizational Energy Program. And over the years, this is kind of ongoing counting, despite us I'm at Henley Business School now in the UK, and Michael is back in the US. But we kind of over time collected data within the broader scope with cases and all kinds of studies, and these are the initial organizations that let us in. We need to sell that we want to work with them going there, like Lufthansa, Hilti, or ABB, and said, do you let us in for 3 years and even pay us money to do that? And, which is kind of a comfortable situation once you get them. And it was 2001, where 2002, difficult economic times in that time. So, but they really helped us. Again, that this gut feeling that this is what we would like to understand more, and so they kind of helped us. And so the study the paper that you looked at here is last year published in JOB, called Energy at Work, Measurement, Validation, Linkage to Unit Effectiveness. So this is kind of the core paper that we looked at. In a way, the literature, and it's interesting, you could sometimes say at that time, because, and I'm sure to a large part because of this group, the entire idea around energy and connected construct has changed in the last 10 years. If you look back at 8-9 years ago, it was kind of a starting idea. So some of the quotes I pulled from the paper and going back might even now we have solved some of these things as a community. So, but if you look at what is energy going to, it's a general capacity for acting, operating, producing an effect. It has been a topic already at that time for 30 years, going back to things like drive, work by Stockdale. Jane Dutton, energy fuel is a fuel that makes great organizations run. And it has been popping up in literature all over the field then and continuing. And there's all kinds of benefits to it in the research. But at that time, interestingly, some of the quotes from some of the people in the room, why the term energy is pervasive in much of organizational life, it is a highly elusive concept in that context. It's a concept that scholars seldomly define. Which is, in a way, then not helpful because we can't really build on scholarly work. And that made us think as a group to say, what can we do about that? From our particular view, we look at collective energy. And then the question, so we lack on measurement devices in this kind of arena of positive constructs at that time. And as we see over the last year, that has changed dramatically in a way. But that's what made us think, well, how can we contribute? What are we interested in this arena? So our main aim for this paper is developing a theory-based instrument, but for collective energy. Most of the research at that time, and still today, we see a few attempts on team engagement. So the work around the Dutch group, running by a couple of Dutch people, going to the team level. But there's not a lot actually looking at teams of departments and units. And we thought this is, and come back to that in a moment, something to explore. So that was the main aim of the study at that moment in time. The reason to look at collective level, in addition to the individual energy work. We know that we are here permanently in a way, as since starting today. We work in groups, communities, teams. This is how we operate together collectively. So it makes sense, if you go at the teamwork level, at one example, to look at how then do these dynamics play out and create shared engagement, shared commitment, something surely, as you know, this community is thriving off. And we work in this social milieu around us. So we also sensitized actually to what the energy levels are. And you all will have the impression, if you're on your research meetings, projects, or in your admin meetings, you're full of energy and thriving. If you go in a meeting and the entire meeting is dull, you know, and it takes only 2 minutes so that you're done. You make 3 attempts and that's it. Or it's the other way around. You actually kind of have difficulties, you know, getting up in the morning. It's really boring. An admin meeting, we know that. And all of a sudden you enter this room of 5 people really excited about something, and that is contagious. So we can't, so there's something going on intuitively, and that's what we looked at. And there's all kinds of emergent processes that, as you're aware of, who support that. So it's not a private experience necessarily, but can be a social one, and that's what we kind of looked at. How did we define that at that stage? Kind of in a bit of a dry definition. So it's a collective construct, it's a temporary state, and we come back to that later in some of the research as we go on. And we look at kind of the shared demonstration and experience of a kind of positive active, affect, cognition, but also behavior, kind of in this triad of understanding in pursuit of goals that are organizationally salient, so kind of around a shared agenda. That's how we defined energy as a construct, and that what we wanted to explore, kind of in a way, in a nutshell, repeating that. So how did we do that then in that paper? I think we started actually without hypotheses, if I recall, but then we got kind of recommendations to turn it around and say, why don't you give it a kind of a structure around hypotheses? So that's the structure of the paper. And the first 2 is actually around establishing the construct, in a way, looking at the 3 dimensions, affect, cognition, and behavior as elements of it. Then the question whether it's actually kind of a different construct at the collective level. And then we looked at kind of the validation around, is it different to similar constructs like motivation, efficacy, cohesion, autonomy, kind of opposite to exhaustion. And then the final hypothesis 4 and 5 are kind of predictive validity on it in itself, but also over and above the construct that might be similar. And finally, so these kind of 4 and 5 we looked at work unit level, and then we included a study around where we looked at firm performance, so small and medium enterprises where we had access to, and kind of getting a slightly different view on this as well. So this is kind of the overview of how we kind of set up the paper in a way in this study. The first, and then we did 4 studies, and I just guide you through that a bit. So study 1 was kind of developing the actual measure, like based on identifying items, doing a large interview study, culling items from the literature, various rounds of validating the items as a research team. A huge effort. Why there's 3 names actually on the paper, but you can imagine that there's lots of colleagues and doctoral students actually involved, particularly in that phase, which we're really grateful that we had the chance to. And then we had a sample, kind of a sample of 2,000 people, which we split, where we start trying to establish the structure of the scale, and then kind of revalidate in a second, again, use A-based sample in a different organization. These were both at the individual level, and then we kind of work with departments in study 3, and like I said, and then in German firms to kind of go one step further in this study. So this is kind of study 1 and study 2, item generation and dimensionality, item analysis, which worked out. Kind of both English studies. In summary, what we found is that the structure that we anticipated worked out. We had to change the item. We started with 17. And not all were working. We needed to kind of add 1 or 2. So we ended up with a kind of 14-item scale at the end with 3 dimensions in total. And that's kind of how it then looked at the end, the scale that we've published and we're using in other papers as well. You can see effective energy, cognitive energy, and behavioral energy as a result of that. And then kind of we went on to understand then how is it different or similar to other constructs, and we could kind of successfully differentiate them to a kind of, basically, first step was then to look, does it actually hold at the collective level? So far, we just did it on the individual level. Here we again asked individuals, but referring again to the group, but then we looked at actually group level data in the time 1 and time 2 kind of multinational setting. That multinational setting brought us a bit of more hurdles because we needed to create equivalence across countries and languages. So we had 5 languages in there and 5 nations, so we did that. Interestingly, we had a huge section in the paper, which then I think was kind of cut to 2 sentences in the final version. A lot of headache, then basically reduced kind of to a side note, which is, again, one of these interesting things that we all face. In a nutshell, so here can see, so if you just to give you a bit of a flavor, so France, Sweden, Switzerland, UK, and USA, so the languages that we had, the measures that we used for the construct that we want to differentiate from, and then to check kind of for predictive validity, and we used our 14-item scale for this one. And in a nutshell, we found support for that POS different, productive energy is different to these 5 other constructs, and we could show that they explain additional variance in these 3 constructs over and above these 5 kind of similar but different constructs, which was basically kind of for us the breakthrough, because we could see that this really worked out. We then did, we'll just go through that. We then did a final study, which is slightly different. And we had a chance, kind of in a panel study, to include that scale for kind of 92 kind of small and medium companies. And what we did here is we asked the organization, so we have before and work unit level, and we have opportunity to see where the construct also works at a firm level. And we used kind of the scale, but then we used key informants in a way to tell us about overall performance of the organizations, which would be kind of either CEOs, top managers, or the HR director. And this worked out as well for this study. So, and this is what we then wrote up for the paper. So in a way, initial contributions based on these 4 studies. So we could show reliability, aggregation, justification at 2 different levels, kind of work unit and as well firm, cross-national, cross-language equivalence, various levels of validity according to the idea of validating a measure, and different ways of showing criterion validity. And so by that, like if you look at the main aim, we kind of after years successor to create a measure here for a positive constructs, in this case, energy of work units or organizations. That's about kind of the paper. How did we kind of continue? What are we doing at present to show you a bit of that, and what do we plan to do? We just pulled a few kind of our ongoing ideas. You can see at the above, that's the paper that we just spoke about. We then kind of try to understand the level of leadership and empowerment perception, and how that kind of works through energy on morale. We looked at HR practices as well at the firm level. How do they influence potential this construct? And then this paper we actually presented years ago. We're still working on that. But the interesting one on that one is actually if you compare where this is positioned in this case and where it's positioned here, it's transformation leadership, climate as an antecedent. And here we try to understand whether actually, in the language of the previous talk, whether energy actually becomes a resource for a leader to feel kind of empowered, and by that potentially engage in more inspiring leadership. So in a way, in a nutshell, what you could do, you get the leader that you create and deserve. It changes the picture. And so we're excited about looking at that in a way, in a different sort, and it kind of decouples in a way always the idea that this has to be the starting point in that. Some ideas how we continue. Oh no, that's a complex one, as you can see. Forget about the detail. Forget about the detail. We also lost. But the question here is, and that's kind of an ongoing discussion in a way. So the energy is a temporary state. So it's temporary. It's it can fluctuate, and we happen to ignore that in the measurement paper in a way, didn't we? So we kind of didn't. Yeah. So we kind of from a measurement point of view, and so. What we do here is actually, we like to open up, looking at some point into inverse U-shaped kind of ideas, whether there's actually too much energy at some point, and we're pretty sure to find that. And the other question, and this is what we look at here, how can we actually maintain energy engagement levels over time? So the top box looks at mobilizing, and it uses kind of strategic transformational leadership as a mechanism to instill that, and all the rest of it in some underlying mechanism. Now that's pretty straightforward. The lower part is looking at what we call the process of energy maintenance. So what does actually have to happen, or how could it play out that we kind of keep energy levels, engagement levels, perception and experience at a high level over time? And so following a temporal lens on looking at this. And so we then kind of look again at transformational leadership, but we decided, because we've done some other work on climate of leadership, to include as well transformational leadership climate and something that we call followership climate. So some of you might be familiar with the idea of followership and leading up, and we think that potentially the first phase can change and create something like a followership leading up climate, particularly within managerial levels, to actually challenge and inspiring upwards, which then kind of will impact energy over time. And finally, I think we need to look at understanding how actually energy time 1 and time 2 are linked, and how we deal with performance. So does performance, and in our more practice-oriented work, this performance might drive, actually experience excitement and passion and really high level of drive again, but it might also be that over time there might be a tipping point, there might be phases of exhaustion, and so we might see kind of these things there. So that's kind of ongoing, and in a way to look at that. And finally, what we are interested in, and some has started, is it would be kind of a good next step to look at cross-level effects, actually to look at, collective level energy constructs and theory and individual level at the same time, and also look for cross-level effects on individuals. And I'll give you an example where we are planning to do that, about to start collecting data. Then there's a temporal question that I think we need to kind of look at, we can't ignore in the way which I just mentioned. And then we would like to look at actually, this measure is about positive energy, and because it's a positive conference. But we also look at negative energy, so which we call corrosive energy. And colleagues of mine have developed a scale, and actually might be interesting to look at them in parallel and see how they play out over time. And I think that we're at the start of that, what the joint dynamics are. I think there is more, the dependency on leadership, potentially embodied by leaders, is kind of a too narrow focus on understanding engagement and passion and experience in organizations. So I think what we would do is look at more kind of followership, dynamic, co-created leadership, and these perceptions of excitement, and we started with that as well. And then two further context. We started about to do kind of to have a Center for Engaging Leadership launch at the business school where I am, and we might look at actually energy of management teams. And I'm asked kind of, that research has created some interest from practitioners, and so and I can show we work slightly different with that. And so often I'm asked to look not at the business entirely, but actually at management teams and how energetic they are. Now, this is a pretty difficult one if you go into an energy kind of team and you do kind of little measurement, and we don't measure only positive, we also measure negative energy. But it's fascinating and actually how dysfunctional or functioning they are. So we kind of explore whether we particularly look at kind of middle management teams and senior management teams, and whether they understand themselves as an entity, work as an entity, and potentially have as an underlying mechanism some of these ideas. And the final one, we just started a study with a doctoral student who was interested in virtual project teams, and we kind of now try to understand actually how the external, in a way, leader and emerging leader from within a project team, how they actually shape engagement or energy in a virtual setting. And I think that might be very different than in a co-located setting to an extent. That's kind of where we go. Finally, like I mentioned earlier, we over time, and it's, you know, in research terms, it might be a waste of time, but we couldn't resist to work with organizations, and organizations came to us also because we started with organizations, so they were interested, what are you doing? So, and two things that kind of are with us for a while, and some of you might know that. Colleagues of mine, Heike and her previous colleague, worked on a matrix of different energy states, and we kind of work with that ongoing, and it changes in shape, and some of our deep assumptions we need to, prejudices, as you could say, we need to kind of throw overboard. But this is kind of how we work with organizations then. So we look at positive, negative energy and different intensity. And in our experience is that this opens up always new work ideas for research. So while you actually, you help them develop, challenge, and but it also opens up new routes. And this is particular, I had recently 2 occasions where kind of management teams wanted to work with that. And you can imagine if you, and we have a little survey behind that as an instrument, and you can imagine if you have in a room kind of managers with substantial influence, and you do a survey, and then you have results which are ideally all here. The reality in management teams, they're also ideally all here, you know, because they like their fight. And so that becomes then kind of actually an interesting start for new research ideas. In one organization, they were pretty sure, one team where I was invited to work with them in a workshop, they were here when it was all about operational business. So how do we do our business? That's really kind of customer delivery and all the rest of it. Fantastic. They had a vision for 2 years. They hadn't done any single piece of work around the vision because they even formulated that, but they couldn't decide whether this is actually what we want to do. So there were 2 camps and permanently fighting. So there's something that then led us to some further ideas to kind of, what actually happens if you take the purpose away? So, or you can't create purpose, does it actually have an impact, and all the rest of it. And so this becomes pretty powerful. And by that, and based on this, some of you might know, we then did something which you even more shouldn't do at my stage of the career. We wrote a book. And then it had a racy title and all of it. But this, again, this is interesting because that opened up new routes where organization, we got kind of credibility then to come in and do stuff with organizations. This is a Harvard Business book, and so which helped us then kind of to go into the next set of activities, actually open up in real setting and do some work. But it's very dangerous because you need to translate more or less everything that you've done. You know, you need to transfer, write it all up again, which is annoying, time-consuming, and to a limited sense rewarding. So, but once it's there, well, really good, you know. Yeah, I think that was it, what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.